Welcome back to the Kelowna Real Estate Podcast. I'm your mortgage broker host, Taylor Atkinson.
And I'm your real estate agent host, Matt Glenn. What's cooking today, Taylor?
Oh, cooking. Yeah. We went to Lake House last night for a little cooking class. It was incredible, man. Really cool spot.
Your Instagram was popping off. It looked awesome.
Yeah. I mean, you walk out of there with tons of confidence. We cooked paella.
Oh, yeah.
So you're like, I could definitely cook this at home. But they do a bunch of the prep work and coach you through it. It was awesome. I think Emily and I were the only ones that didn't walk away with leftovers. We ate it all. Such a cool experience and beautiful venue. Like if anyone hasn't been there, book a class. It is a little bit more expensive, but when you think about like the cost of that kitchen and the chef and the ingredients and everything, like it's well worth it. There's good value there. So
yeah, Chef Travis Pye runs a good ship there. He's doing good things.
That's just one of the fun activities we've done this summer locally.
Nice.
We want to jump into talking about the show. It was an awesome show today. Anne McMullin, she is the president and CEO of UDI, so Urban Development Institute. If you're part of their program or have listened to them or seen her on LinkedIn, like just an awesome organization. Basically, they're like the voice of, mostly a group of developers and professionals in the industry.
Pretty big group of developers though, like most of them.
Yeah, there's 850 members and they advocate, at like a BC provincial level with the housing minister and EB. And like, she's really just like a great voice and hard to be in like a balancing act in that position, right? Like most of us just sit here and kind of complain about legislation. She's actually providing like solutions at a government level.
Well, and she's talking to everyone that's affected by all these swinging rule changes and not very well conceived rules and laws that come out.
Yeah.
We go into quite a few different ones in this episode and she lays out the reasons pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, one that like I thought was hilarious in like a bad policy. She highlighted that developments in Vancouver have to have $1 million allocation to artwork for a building, which is just humorous if we're talking about affordability and putting units out there. And like, I love Vancouver. Like the artwork around those buildings is incredible. And now it kind of makes sense. You're forcing a developer to spend $1 million on art. It just goes down to the end consumer. Let's say like a 50 unit building, that's 20 grand a pop. Like if someone is out there buying, would you rather have like 20 grand off your purchase price or like a really cool statue when you walk into the lobby? Like, I don't know.
Well, it's funny. Like the art idea is a good idea, but then you're also talking about affordability. It's like, okay, well, where can we cut costs? The other one that she highlights here is a 20% social housing aspect in the new buildings. And then we went into quite a bit of detail in the pod about this. And then I heard the story about Curve, the big building in Vancouver that just went into basically foreclosing and receivership now. And then you read the stories and like, just check this out. The project was approved by City in Vancouver in 2022, but has yet to reach the construction stage. Earlier this year, the developer secured approval to cut the planned social housing units in exchange for a $55 million cash in lieu payment. So they had to pay $55 million to the city to not have social housing, like a luxury building right in probably the richest part in Vancouver. And then now it's in receivership. Wonder why.
That is insane. Like that is just kind of the theme of this show is like one person's not speaking to the other person, Yeah. Like we need to build units. We need developers to like be part of this solution. And they're just being handcuffed with like crazy policy.
That is so crazy. Like $55 million. So that ups the price of all those units. On one hand, you're going to bitch that the units are too expensive, but then you're also going to up them all by, what is that? How many? I don't even know how many units are in that project, but it's got to be $300,000 or $400,000 a unit just to pay for that.
But then where does that money go? It gets allocated to social housing elsewhere in the city. Yeah. I know.
I'm not sure about that. That was a tongue in cheek, but now that the economy is like getting tighter and things are getting squeezed, we get to hear all these crazy stories and like pay attention to them. And it's just like, wow. Another funny thing about this Curve is it was just vacant lots before. It wasn't like they kicked anyone out. Like it was just a vacant house. They're putting more housing in and government, in this case, the City of Vancouver, says $55 million to not have social housing where it doesn't really fit in anyway.
I wonder how they came up with that number. Like,
yeah, honestly.
50 was too round, so just tack on another 5.
After a couple of beers, like just double it, man.
Yeah, the other point, we kind of spoke about, which you've spoken about, fairly passionately a bunch, is the foreign buyer ban.
It does not make any sense. Like, especially, I understand maybe back when I guess Chinese people were buying all the expensive houses and keeping them vacant, but now we have a vacant house tax and a foreign buyer ban. Like, just think about this foreign buyer ban. Like, what's going down in the US? We have like basically an opportunity to brain drain so much of the US so they can come to Canada, but they can't buy a house when they get here.
Yeah.
Right? Like, thanks for that. Also, like, she said it in the show, but like, it is kind of racist to say Chinese or Asians can't buy houses in Canada. If you just look at a map, look how big our country is, and you can't buy a house here unless you live here. Like, what?
Yeah, and she highlighted like it's kind of geographical. So, in certain parts of Greater Vancouver is really where it's being affected most. But one, like, who cares if they're buying pre-construction development? Like, that's great. It's investment to our economy, which we need. And then the other fact would be, luxury homes in like North Vancouver or something, which is like, again, who cares? You're pumping cash into the
$2-3 million
economy.
House. Why are we just saying no to that money?
Even if it's like 100 transactions a year, it's absolutely a drop in the bucket. But it's not even just like the capital being invested into the economy, it's the confidence. Like, who internationally was even interested in investing in anything in Canada right now, let alone housing, if like we're restricting them to? So it was a really cool show.
Okay, let's just stick on these pre-sales. So like, agreed. So like, we talk about this, like the pre-sales, like how they get off the ground. We've talked about it on the show, like many episodes. Developers have to hit a certain amount of sales before they can even get the financing to build these projects. So like, when you're buying a pre-sale, you're basically paying money to finance a project to put more units on. Right. So when you just make it hard as possible to do this, we need more housing. We need more housing. Everyone says it. Everyone knows it. The path should be cleared for you to do this, and not just roadblock after roadblock after roadblock to get these projects off the ground. It just does not make any sense.
Yeah. There was also a post. I mean, there's a bunch of different municipalities across Canada, but I think Vancouver, like new single family home sales were down like 58% from last year. It's like no one is building homes because no one's buying these homes because they just cannot afford like DCC fees or like artwork or like any of these policies. So anyways, I guess like, Anne's kind of in the weeds, speaking to developers, speaking to government. She's kind of the middle person, trying to find a middle ground that works. Yeah, a lot of great stuff in this show. So I think you guys are going to enjoy it.
All right. This episode, like every episode, sponsored by Century 21, Assurance Realty, the best brokerage in the interior BC. We're growing. We have property management, sales, residential, and commercial. We're in it. We are putting offices in Salmon Arm, Vernon, Creston, Castlegar, Kamloops. We're all over the interior. So if you're a buyer or seller looking for an agent, give us a call. Or if you're an agent looking for a brokerage, give us a call and enjoy the episode. This is a good one.
Okay. Anne, welcome to the show. So grateful to have you here today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
First of all, can you just kind of give us a real high level who you are and what you do?
Yes, my name is Anne McMullin, and I'm the president and CEO of the Urban Development Institute, which is an organization that represents the commercial, residential, and industrial developers in British Columbia. And we advocate on behalf of the industry and also provide opportunities for networking and education for our membership. Our membership is about 850 companies. You join UDI as a company, not as an individual. And we represent what is the development industry. So it'd be all the major developers in British Columbia, as well as architectural firms, engineering firms, accounting firms. So any company that is related to the process of development. Yeah, we represent literally hundreds of thousands of people throughout British Columbia.
Awesome. Well, so yeah, you guys are obviously have, what do you call them? Like an event, like in Kelowna, you're based in Kelowna, Vancouver. Where else in BC?
And Victoria.
And Victoria?
We have an office in Victoria, an office, as you said, in Kelowna. Our main office, I guess, or our head office at downtown Vancouver.
I didn't know that you guys were so intertwined at a government level, advocating and giving feedback, and that communication line is so well open. So I guess, is that one of your main jobs, is to take, feedback from developers and provide it back at a government level, and vice versa? When you hear policy coming down the pipeline, like provide that to developers?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. I have a large board, but then we have a tighter executive committee made up of 9 people. And we meet monthly. In fact, we probably meet and talk almost every day, many of them. That is our job, and is to advocate on behalf of the industry. And we work with all 3 levels of government, at the municipal level, the provincial level, and the federal level. And we work both with elected officials and the regulators, the bureaucracy. And it's just exactly as you say, whether it's policy that is being developed by government, or more often we've got recommendations of how to improve policy. And so that is a huge part of what we do. And we have very strong working relationships with all levels of government and with bureaucracy. We've been at it a long time, and our information is always factual, data driven, and we come up with solid solutions. And so really, our job is to advocate on behalf of the industry, but also to help the government as well. But also really it's about creating great communities.
Yeah. I mean, one of your most recent posts, it's a little bit, I don't want to say depressing, but like there are obviously a lot of developers being vocal about having layoffs and, struggling right now. Do you want to try and summarize that post a little bit?
Yes. And I think that's the crux of the issue that we have right now is the cost of building homes is more expensive than the average person in British Columbia can afford. And as a result, we're seeing less projects launching, we're seeing less starts, less applications. And as a result, we're going to start seeing layoffs, which we've already started to see. So we've had enormous pressures, of course. We've seen rising interest rates, although they've come down a bit. We've had escalation in construction costs. And of course, labor costs always go up due to inflation and cost of living increases. And we can't do anything about those. But what government can play a role in is production of policies and taxation and fees and charges. And so now it's in some cases it's fees, taxes, charges, and even sort of cost of waiting for processing can add up to 30% of the cost of building a new home. And when median incomes in this province, household incomes are about $100,000, when you get up to a certain price point, a cost, the buyer can't afford it. And we've been warning all levels of government that we're getting to that point. You can't keep adding fees and charges and costs and all these things. We're going to hit the ceiling. And we've hit that ceiling for 80% of the population can only afford up to about $850,000. So that's why we're seeing, a real slowdown. And the repercussions of that are just starting to be felt because these things, unfortunately, take time. If a developer puts an application in or maybe slows down on a project or got a building permit but doesn't go ahead with that project, then the people that were working on it, there's the potential of layoffs. So we have seen layoffs at West Group, at Rennie, and at other companies. And I know that engineering firms and architectural firms are all waiting and wonder when is this going to fall. And the industry really is in a state of crises, but it's that cost of how much it costs to build and what people can afford. So it's complicated, but in a way, it's just simple arithmetic. It's just simple math. When you're producing something that people want but can't afford, it doesn't get sold, so then you don't build it, then you don't make it.
Yeah.
Like the government's been receptive to any of your suggestions or anything? Or
yes, but this isn't a criticism of government, and I don't want to come across it, but government is very slow. They've got many competing interests, and the latest announcement, which was paying the majority of the development cost charges at occupancy rather than at building permit, you're saving the interest on that money over that 3 or 4 year period. We've been working on that. We had to demonstrate it from a financial viability perspective. The government need to figure out, what's it going to cost the government or not going to cost the government. And then it's got to go to cabinet, so these things just take time. And so it's unfortunate because it took time to get here and now take time to unwind. But there is receptivity, yes, very much so. And some municipalities are better than others. And the provincial government is not receptive to it because they don't want to see layoffs. But now we've got to go back to the drawing board. Okay, how do we do this? How do we unwind that? Go to the unintended consequences. So it's, frustrating, I guess, because I don't like the phrase, but I do feel a little bit, we told you so. But here we are. So
the DCC is being paid at occupancy. That's not in Kelowna. Is that a Vancouver thing?
No, it's a British Columbia thing. I think it starts January 2026. So you can pay 25% of your DCC at building permit, and then you can hold off 75% of the rest of it for 4 years or at occupancy, whichever comes first. The developer has to take out a surety bond to guarantee that that money is paid. So the municipalities are left whole. So it's no cost to municipalities because they also have the guarantee that it will get paid. For the developer, what it is it's saving the interest on that money that they would have to borrow to pay for the DCC because they don't get paid for the building in a sense until you occupy. When you close, then you as a buyer pay. So the development cost charge, it could be like $30 or $40 million. So you're saving, let's say 4.5% on $30 million or $40 million. It all adds up.
Yeah.
Will this get things moving? It might for some, but there's been so many fees, charges, taxes, policies that have been layered on over the last number of years. We need to change about 15 things to really make a difference.
I mean, we've brought this up a few times over the last 2 years, probably like, yeah, let's delay DCCs until occupancy. Seems like a no-brainer. I guess my only question in regards to that is the DCC, is it locked in at the time of the application? Like that's how much you pay? Or is it, let's say they pay 25% of the DCCs now, and then in 3 years they have occupancy. Is it based on the new DCC fees in like 2028?
That's right. It will depend on the municipality, right? So, like Surrey, for instance, said they're not raising their DCC fees. So it will depend on the municipality.
Have you been dealing with this new GST for first-time home buyers? That is a rebate and not an exemption. It's confusing because I had a buyer walk out of a deal recently because they just didn't have the cash to pay for it to get the rebate in the future. Almost seems like not really helping the right people. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree. Governments have often well-intentioned policies, but in practice, so it depends, the ability of a developer too, to say, okay, well, we'll pay it. There's a way of almost loaning it to the buyer. So sort of creative solutions in that regard, because you've got to come up with the money. Can you go to your bank and borrow it through a line of credit but often it's first-time home buyers. They're using their very last penny. Like, I don't even have any money to give you so that you can give me back, right? I don't have the $5, right?
It's like if you have the money,
it's like, can you loan me $5? I don't have $5 to loan you. So even if you're going to give it back to me, I don't have it. So, so there are sort of creative ways of looking at, can the developer help the first-time home buyer? And so once they close, then it's deducted.
Yeah.
So there's creative ways, but it's a huge amount of money. So it's you and me that are ultimately paying for it through our taxes. But, we have lobbied for that it be a GST rebate on all new homes under $1 million, because for the first-time home buyer, it's one thing, but let's just say you've got two people or two apartments and they've come together. Well, they're not first-time home buyers now, but they want to buy something bigger, and it doesn't allow them to move out of or move up their housing continuum.
Yeah. Taylor and I have been talking a lot about it. It should be for all principal residences under $1 million. Mm-hmm. Like, it would make sense to GST investors, I guess, but I agree.
Yeah. I mean, can you give us some insight on some of the conversations you're having at government level? Like, what suggestions or solutions are you guys discussing with them or urging?
Well, there's a number, both at the municipal level and at the provincial level. So, one of the ones that is a really big one is in building, you're required to have a certain percentage. In fact, it's 20% of below market rental units in a building. So the new renter is subsidizing essentially 20% of inclusionary zoning in a building. And at this stage, when the builder can't even afford to build at what the going rents are, to lower that, we can even lower it to 5%. And it sounds like a great idea, but when the cost of delivering a unit is more than what the average person can pay in rent, and then you've got to further add more costs because you've got to now subsidize 20%. So that's a big one. I don't want to put any sort of subjectivity on. Sure, inclusionary zoning sounds great. Let's have all the high rent people pay for the low rent people. Great. But if the money's not there, again, if you don't have the $5 to loan, then we're not going to get anything built.
No.
And so the next one I want to just talk about is the rapidly advancing green building standards. Again, I'm not putting any subjectivity to it, but it adds an enormous amount of cost. So we're talking to the provincial government about that extensively. So when you look at green building initiatives, or what they call the Step Code 3, the new building code, it's adding upwards of $50,000 to $60,000 a door. And the savings to the home buyer or the homeowner or the rent is about $5 to $10 a month. Now, you could argue that it's saving things in embodied carbon and those sort of things, but we say, look, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis. What is this costing? And what is the benefit? And if, as a society, then that's what we're calling for. Well, then, there's got to be offsets, whether it's the auto industry or other industries, whether it's government subsidies or tax-free, but you keep adding and adding and adding, whether it's triple glazing the windows, and it sort of goes on and on, or the building requirements that are in place now. The buildings that were around, that built 15 years ago don't have those. So are they less safe, or are they less green? So I think that when we bring in these initiatives, we really need to be mindful of what the costs are. So when we're adding $100,000 a door, what benefit are we getting? So the provincial government and the environment minister have agreed, yes, let's look at this. Let's examine this. What is really required, and where can we perhaps lower the cost? It's the mandatory electrification of buildings, no use of natural gas, EV charging stations, saving existing trees. So then we have to change the routing of the parking lot or the driveway and all that. Then that adds more carbon from concrete and things. So then we've got to pay for that because we've added more carbon, but it's because of a requirement to save one tree. So again, I'm not saying whether these things are good or bad. My job is to say whether the impact and the cost that it has on housing and the delivery of housing. It's their job to figure out whether this is necessary for the environment or not, and if it is, at what cost. If it's costing so much that we're not getting housing built, that's what we need to think about. And the new building code as well is requiring that 20% of units be adaptable. Again, that adds cost. And often they don't get rented or purchased. So then you're holding them for when somebody may or may not want those units. So when you have an adaptable unit, it has to be bigger. There's all the changes to it that you can imagine that go into that. And when 20% of them have to be, you're adding costs. Those are the three sort of big ones that we're talking about. I could rattle off a whole bunch more. Like in the city of Vancouver, there's a public art fee of $1 million a building.
I saw that in one of your emails. What is the public art fee?
You pay $1 million to the city towards public art, or you can put $1 million art installation in your building, one or the other. Most developers will choose to do it themselves just because, I don't know, I want to have some control.
Like affordable housing, 20% of these places have to be under rent, but you need to pay $1 million for a statue.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Yeah, who came up with that? Like, when was that implemented? Like, I don't understand. It's got to get passed, right?
Quite a while ago. Yeah. And then saying, okay, well, we're going to reduce parking, but you have to now give everybody a bus pass. I'm like, well, if they're going to go into this building, then they probably don't have a car. So why is it our responsibility to give them a bus pass?
At like the developer level, like, is there feedback, like, we're just going to put things on pause, or are they leaving to Alberta or the States? Like, what are developers doing right now if it just doesn't pencil?
All of the above. So pre-sale projects, wood frame concrete townhomes, are tracking well below pace of sales, which is needed to get to the 70% pre-sale threshold. And some projects are just on pause. Many projects are on pause.
In Kelowna, most are on pause. I don't know if there's any new ones coming for sale. It's a tough one right now for the pre-sales.
Building permits in Metro Vancouver and I think around the province have dropped by about 10%. Some of them have actually experienced declines of 40% and even as high as 85%.
In your opinion, do you think this is going to actually raise prices in the next 5 years because of all this slowdown?
That's the sad part. There's only 20% of the people that can afford it. And if there's less supply, so then that 20% will then be competing for that short supply.
Yeah.
So then the prices will go up. And then you're creating a bigger delta between what's available and what's for sale.
Yeah. I mean, you hear it frequently from a small amount of the population that's probably hoping that the market's going to crash, but they're like, it's not sustainable. These prices aren't affordable. Like, it's going to crash. And you're like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. However, like, supply and demand would argue that point.
Well, I think that it's not going to crash. What is crashing is our ability to build. So it's not that the prices are going to come way, way down because the cost of delivery hasn't come way, way down.
Mm-hmm.
So You're not going to flood the market and lose money. Why would you do that? Why would you build a bunch of buildings when it's costing you $1,000 a square foot to build, but people can only afford $850 a square foot? So it doesn't make sense. It's not the market's crashing, the industry's crashing. So our price is going to come off a little bit, sure, because with rent, the prices are coming off for sure because buildings got built and they need to be rented. Yeah. And so developers or builders are renting at a loss. And over time, the value of that building will go up and the equity in it will be paid down and rents will go up a little bit each year, right? So over time, if you're building a building and you need to collect $5 or $6 a square foot for rent to cover your costs, you're not doing that very often. The average rents is sort of a $350 to $450 a square foot. I mean, obviously people pay less than that, but you're getting up there at that price. So, if you think it's $5 a square foot and you're living in 1,000 square feet, you're paying $5,000 a month. They can't come down that much. And it's so much based on income. Like I said, when there was room in the market, when you could build for $350 a square foot and incomes were at that $100,000 level, there was the room. And so governments just kept adding costs. And frankly, in a way, seeing the industry like an ATM, just kept taking and taking. And we said, there's a limit here. There's a limit. We've reached the limit. Oh, no, you haven't. You keep on building. You say that all the time. I'm warning you, there's a limit. Here are the incomes. Here are the costs. Many of them are like, oh, I see. Okay, so how do we reduce costs? Or governments lower income tax. Interest rates can come down a bit more, whether they will or not, I don't know. Income tax is going to come down. I don't know. PST going to come down? I don't think so. So unless you have more money in your jeans or more money in the bank or more money coming in every month, salaries are going to tick up a little bit each year. The cost of living allowance are going to go up 2% per year, your salaries. And can costs come off 2 or 3%, 3 or 4% over the next couple of years? Then maybe there's some room for some profit that you have to demonstrate to the banks that you can realize a profit, then you will get financing. But you can't get financing from the bank unless you can demonstrate the project is going to be profitable.
Yeah.
Banks are not in the business of losing your money or my money. They're not going to loan you that money if they think that you're going to go underwater.
The salary is an interesting one to me because, yeah, it does make more sense. Like people do need to earn more money compared to the expenses we have. But where does the salary come from? Like I feel like in Kelowna, we have a lot of small businesses, entrepreneurs. So, if a store down the street needs to pay their employee $4 an hour more, well, who owns that store? That's a direct expense to them. So we're just kind of like chasing our tail in that scenario.
Well, that's how inflation kind of works. Is everything gets more expensive, then wages have to go up, then things get more expensive, then wages go up. And it just kind of, yeah, exactly.
Or can you lower income tax? But then that's less money for the government. And the government needs to look at their spending and how they spend. And are they spending way more of our money than they should be? Everything's connected.
Yeah, to me, that one is like staring us right in the face. Like the spending needs to be under control a little bit. Like that seems like the easiest part of this. But I guess when was the writing on the wall? Like hindsight, what year was this kind of developing where people were like, okay, this is a serious problem? Like it seems like we've been talking about it forever.
2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when we started saying, look, incomes are at this level and it's now costing us this to build. And it was 2 or 3 years ago when projects had been launched or sales had been started and construction costs during COVID started to go up like this. And those buildings, they sold at this level, 2021 level, and they're building at 2023 prices. And it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've seen foreclosures, seen companies go under. You've probably heard about the foreclosures. There's been buildings that aren't getting finished, buildings that aren't going ahead, buildings that have started, maybe digging a hole and have stopped.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, I see cranes in the air. Well, yeah, those were cranes of projects that were sold, 3 years ago, let's say.
Yeah.
And then they got their building permit and then they started construction. And those projects may or may not be underwater, depending on what they sold for and what, contracts that they had in place for construction costs. So the ones that are, midway, the big companies are able to hold on. One developer I know well, speaking with him last week, he said like 25 to 30% of people are not closing on the project. So he's going to have 30% of his units. He's going to have to pay GST on those. He's going to get the deposit back, but the deposit's a fraction of what it cost him. And he's going to try to sell them in this market. And people just can't afford that because interest rates went up. They lost their job. And so people are, backing out on their purchases.
We're seeing that as well. I guess, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? I don't want to fully blame the government. And I know that's not what we're doing here, but obviously, we kind of went through COVID. We went through essentially getting close to hyperinflation. Some of the things were kind of out of their hands, obviously, globally. Are there some solutions that are being implemented where it's alleviating some of this pain? And, you guys in your organization or developers are going, yeah, if we hang tight for the next couple of years, we feel there's some optimism at the end of this.
Well, I think what I would say is that we are working extremely hard over the next year, 18 months to make substantial changes. So am I optimistic? I have to be. I have to be optimistic that we will get change and that all of us pulling together, that our companies and our employees and everybody is, speaking with the government, doing the research, getting the information, sitting down with regulators saying, this is what we can do. So yes, I think there will be, but it's going to take time. It's going to take, a year to 18 months. Like I said, the DCC change is not going to be in effect right away. It takes a bit of time for it to be implemented. So the light at the end of the tunnel is that we do get some substantial, massive changes in policy, that income levels do go up by cost of living, and that interest rates perhaps come down a bit. That's the only thing that we've got. That's probably 2 years before there's any substantial feeling of relief for projects to say, okay, we got this. It's going to take time. But this is also a year of like massive slowdown this year. So then you got to catch up, and people say, well, where's everybody living? Well, they're living in, with roommates and in basement suites, and there's couples living with other couples and people staying at home, living at home longer, moving away from Vancouver, moving away from BC.
Yeah, we're seeing a population decline in BC, which is crazy.
And so when you have a population decline, you have less people paying income tax, you're building less homes, you've got less people paying property tax. And the property transfer tax alone is, I think, I'd have to go back and look, I should have had that stat, but I think it was at one point as high as $3 billion that they would receive in property transfer tax. Well, they're not going to get that. They're going to get probably half that. So that's a huge hole in the government budget. And then if there's a slowdown in construction, if construction's at 30% in Kelowna or Vancouver or wherever, then those are job losses, and that's less income tax being paid, and that's less product being paid, and that's less people working. It's a cascading, because I don't have to explain it to you or your viewers. We all know what happens. People think, oh, well, the developers, no, they're just not getting rich. That's not the point. The developers will figure out where to go and build, or they just won't build. But what does that mean to you and me and our families and children and people with jobs in the construction sector or engineering or architects? It's hard to turn it around.
Yeah. With property transfer tax, I'm curious, have you heard any rumbling? Like, do we need it in BC? Obviously, it's BC and Ontario, but like
$2 or $3 billion.
I know, but like, is that not something we can take away?
Well, I don't disagree with you. However, it goes back to, can the government reduce their costs by $1 billion?
Yeah.
Maybe we wouldn't need the property transfer tax, or maybe that could be lowered, but they rely on it. It's a cash cow, right? You get GST on new homes. There's a property transfer tax. It's incredible the amount of taxation that's put on housing.
Yeah.
And people don't see it because people could afford something, right? But now it's even hard to afford, an 800 square foot condo in Kelowna or Victoria or in the markets, And the cost of construction, probably it's more expensive in Kelowna than in the Lower Mainland.
What about something like the foreign buyers ban? Like, when I look at this and I think about what the beefing right now with the US and what's happening, feels like it's a massive opportunity for us to brain drain the USA, but they're not allowed to come here and buy a house. It just doesn't make any sense to me, at least from south of the border. I don't know about east or west, but what's your opinion on this?
We've been opposed to foreign buyers tax since Christy Clark brought it in all those years ago. It doesn't do anything. First of all, in our opinion, it was a racist thing to do because they were seeing certain people buying up these big single family homes on the west side of Vancouver.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It didn't help. In fact, it hindered. None of these taxes help. We warned them. You add on all these taxes, whether it's foreign buyers tax, speculation tax, additional school tax. You can't tax your way to affordability. And we told them, you're just going to raise prices because it's going to limit supply.
Yeah.
But with the foreign buyers tax, or the foreign buyers ban.
Yeah, it's a ban. It's not even a tax. It's a ban.
It's access to equity. Why are we banning equity in the development of housing? It's a huge risk to develop a tall building or a building. You build a single family home, it's a risk, but think about the tens of millions of dollars that go into a multifamily development. And if we're only allowed to use Canadian money, and it's just Canadian money swirling around, we need to have an influx of an investment in our country, an investment in our industries. An investment, whether it's natural gas or, forestry or mining or whatever it is, the auto industry, the steel industry, you need foreign investment. You need money to come to our country. Our leaders go on trade missions to other countries to encourage them to invest in this country.
Yeah, but don't buy a house.
Don't invest in the multi-billion-dollar housing industry because somehow that's wrong.
I agree with you. I've tried to figure it out and it just makes no sense at all.
And then politicians will say, well, it's popular. The public is supportive of it. Well, is that how we make policy in this country, in this world? If we always went with what's popular, maybe we wouldn't be making decisions for the minorities or the least advantaged. Policy should not necessarily be about what's popular. And if it's the right thing to do, and if that's what we need foreign capital in our market. I talked about all these policies and regulations. Access to capital is the biggest stumbling block because if you can't get your financing, you can't get your project. And you've got to sell a multifamily building within 12 to 18 months. And if it's a large, tall building, it's almost impossible right now to sell 70% or 80% of it. And you have no other way to access capital.
Like it seems like in the last few years, everything's been purpose-built rentals, MLI Select, that type of funding. I guess two questions. Do you feel that that's maybe been a little oversaturated and they've really just focused on that? Or is there asset class that they are not focusing on that they should be? Stratified condo properties, single family homes. Like there's no creative type funding like by the government to support developers on those asset classes. Should there be? And is there anything coming down the pipe on that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's oversaturated the rental market, but took advantage of it. We hadn't built rental in this country or in this province for decades properly. But now the MLI Select program has changed again, and now the charges for that insurance have gone way, way up. So I think that program is done. We've said that to the government, even if for investors. So, again, the investor is bad. To buy a condo and sort of profit from it was seen as bad. Whereas you buy a condo and you put it into the rental pool and you leave it in the rental pool for 20 years. Yes, you made some money on it. But I don't see why we demonize that. So we said, okay, if you really don't want people flipping, what if investors could purchase and they would get the GST rebate as long as it stayed in the rental pool for a certain number of years. So we did get the GST rebate on purpose-built rental, but only if you're building it for a certain number of units. But if you bought a couple of units and you're renting them out and as a small mom and pop operation, what's wrong with that? But somehow we don't want that, but nor do we want the big REITs or the big foreign investments. So where's the money coming from? So yes, there are ways we believe that you can incentivize all forms of housing. A lot of it is just getting the policies, the layering and layering of policies out of the way. Don't have so many of these requirements. You've got so many of these requirements. Like I said, whether it's green building initiatives, EV charging, when we don't even have access to the power.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a topic in Kelowna is like, are we going to have enough power in the next couple of years to fulfill any of these projects? So yeah, EV charging may not be necessary.
And then soil relocation. These things to the average person, they just want a nice home with a nice fixtures and things. But these are the things that we have to deal with is now we have nowhere to dump soil because on the agricultural land, it doesn't meet the requirements, even though it's clean soil, or we don't have enough dumping sites. So now you're having to truck stuff for 30, 40 kilometers, or there's nowhere to dump it. And how is that stayed in the environment? And so we have had a meeting. We did just have a meeting with the minister last week. And it's okay, we see the problem and we need to create more dumping sites on Crown land or in other areas because that adds costs. You've got to hire the truck. The truck is driving for literally hours, and then you're going to dump it somewhere else in the Okanagan and someplace. They don't have any dumping sites. I mean, on the island, they're having to truck it up and over the Malahat, for a couple of hours. So those are sort of things like it sounds like a really good idea. Oh, yes, well, that soil doesn't match that soil or this. So you can only dump soil on the agricultural land if it's soil fit for food production, even though the soil is actually probably completely fine, but it might be just 0.01% more salinity or something like that. There isn't that subjectivity. Salinity levels, the soil can't go there. Well, it just came from here. Why can't I put it over there? Well, so those are the kind of rules that you're up against that, you say, who came up with these? Good intention, but not looking at the cost. And when there was, as I say, room in the system, when there was enough profit, I suppose, in the system that could pay for that stuff. But those days are gone.
Yeah. At the federal level and provincial, in the last year, we've had new leadership, not new parties, but new leadership. Do you feel that leadership in their campaigns, like the promises they've made, are now following through with those promises? Like, is it still going in the direction that people voted for?
At the federal level, it's too early to tell, but the wheels and the machines of government are going in that direction. They're not huge changes, right? The GST relaxation talked about, and then the infrastructure sort of paying for half of the DCC, half the development cost charge. But the amount of money that was earmarked in the federal budget wouldn't pay for even half of what that is. So at the provincial level, there was a lot of really substantial and good work that was done on changes in legislation. But then at the same time, interest rates went up and the cost of housing delivery went up, as well as the new building code that came in, which is adding 10 to 15%. Building step code 3, increasing the DCCs at all levels. There was some good work done. But now in order to have that legislation work, we need to take a lot of the costs out of the system. Provincial government is saying, oh, we didn't realize, I guess they were told that people were still making money, so how could it possibly be a problem? And I said to once a deputy minister, I said, it's just math. It's just money. And I said, if it costs more to build than someone can afford, it doesn't get built. And they went, okay. So people complicate housing. It's an answer to homelessness. It's the answer to adaptability. It's the answer to the saving the environment. No, we're just trying to get housing built. Let's make housing a priority and ensure that it is safe, sustainable, accessible. But if we're bringing the policies to achieve those things and it costs more to get it built, then we need to look at that. Then we need to rethink that. So to answer your question, I think that there is a recognition, and I just have to be hopeful, but it's a lot of work. I mean, what if I've never worked so hard, or I've never worked in such a frustrating, difficult environment in my career? It's hard. It's really hard. And what needs to be done, and that it's going to take time. It's tough to see people lose money.
If you could just make one policy change, one rule, anything like a change that would be implemented tomorrow, whether that's removing current legislation policy or implementing something, what do you think would be the biggest needle mover?
Well, in the Lower Mainland anyway, I think it would be removing the requirement for 20% inclusionary zoning, at least until things turn around. And I think that other big one, certainly in the Okanagan, Victoria, the costs that are associated with the new building code, there has to be a financial offset. You can't add 10% to the cost of building with government requirements without compensation or offset.
Well, honestly, this has been awesome. Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and yeah, you did not disappoint. So thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we'll see you next time you're up in Kelowna at one of the meetings.
Definitely. Well, appreciate this. And it was really a pleasure to talk with you too.